2006. It was a year of war in Lebanon, ongoing violence in Iraq, and continuing crisis in Darfur. In these turbulent times, United Nations Secretary-General Kofi Annan appealed once more to the conscience of the world.
What matters is that the strong as well as the weak agree to be bound by the same rules, to treat each other with the same respect. What matters is that all peoples accept the need to listen, to compromise, to take each other's views into account.
In summer, the tensions between Israel and Lebanon burst into flames. The world appealed to Hezbollah to stop targeting Israeli population centers and to Israel to stop its retaliatory bombing. Among the victims, 4 unarmed UN observers killed by an Israeli missile. While the Security Council struggled to find consensus on a ceasefire resolution, the UN brought relief to the people trapped in southern Lebanon.
War is not, and I repeat, war is not the continuation of politics by other means. On the contrary, it represents a catastrophic failure of political skill and imagination.
Finally, 45 countries pledged to send soldiers for a robust peacekeeping force that would observe Israeli withdrawal and assist the Lebanese armed forces to create an arms-free zone in southern Lebanon. Lebanon's infrastructure had been torn to shreds, and returning refugees had to restart their lives. UNICEF organized a vaccination campaign for 180,000 children and established a lifeline for water. Bakeries were repaired by the World Food Programme. A sense of normalcy returned when schools opened for the first time after the ceasefire, but children are still at risk. More than 100,000 cluster bombs and unexploded ordnance litter towns and fields in South Lebanon. 12-year-old Sakina is one of the victims.
I felt pain in my stomach. There was smoke everywhere and blood pouring from me.
Experts are now defusing the cluster bombs, but the fragile situation in Lebanon was further destabilized when Industry Minister Pierre Gemayel was killed in November. The Security Council agreed to provide technical help to investigate the murder. There was also ongoing fighting in Gaza. The Security Council called on Israel to cease its military action and on Palestinian militants to stop rocket attacks. With new waves of violence in Iraq, the number of civilians killed rose month after month. With nearly 100,000 people fleeing every month, the UN held a high-level meeting on Iraq in September.
There is a grave danger that the Iraqi state will break down, possibly in the midst of a full-scale civil war.
2006 brought back old fears of nuclear bombs. When Iran announced plans to enrich uranium, suspicion grew about the nature of its nuclear program. Kofi Annan, on a visit to Tehran, urged the government to negotiate. Weeks later, another shockwave. North Korea's first nuclear test threatened to unravel the non-proliferation treaty that had contained the spread of nuclear bombs for nearly 40 years. When the Security Council voted on a range of sanctions, the North Korean delegation left under protest.
As a declaration of war.
U.S. Ambassador to the UN, John Bolton.
That is the second time in 3 months that the representative of the DPRK has rejected a unanimous resolution of the Security Council and walked out of this chamber. It is the contemporary equivalent of Nikita Khrushchev pounding his shoe on the desk of the General Assembly.
In Darfur, an estimated 200,000 people have been slaughtered in the conflict between government forces, allied militia, and rebels seeking greater autonomy. More than 2 million people have left their homes, and deadly attacks against civilians are reported every day. Under the most desperate circumstances, new babies are born in the camps. Some, the lucky ones, get medical care and supplies from the UN Population Fund. Actor George Clooney came to the United Nations to draw attention to the victims.
But make no mistake, it is the first genocide of the 21st century. And if it continues unchecked, it will not be the last.
The conflict threatened to spill over into Chad, where remote villages were looted and burned by armed men on horseback. The African Union has agreed to extend its peacekeeping mandate in Darfur with logistical support from the United Nations. The international community urged all parties to accept a ceasefire and political talks as necessary steps towards peace. Across national borders, violence between religious groups and public outcry over controversial cartoons led to a worldwide debate on how to prevent a clash of cultures and religions. In Istanbul, the UN's high-level team on the Alliance of Civilizations presented its final report recommending education, media campaigns, and better opportunities for young people to build bridges and promote a culture of respect.
Human beings have the capacity for great evil, but they've also got the capacity for great good. And that ultimately nothing is beyond resolution.
UN peacekeeping deployment reached a historic high in October, with over 80,000 soldiers and police and 15,000 civilians serving in 18 different missions. In Congo, the UN assisted in the first countrywide elections, a milestone in the peace process. Ballots were distributed to the most remote areas, and votes were often counted by candlelight. After the announcement of the final results, demonstrators opened fire and turned police trucks over. UN peacekeepers had to intervene to restore order. In post-conflict Liberia, each week hundreds of refugees return home. But the country still has an 85% unemployment rate. UN peacekeepers and former fighters are rebuilding the war-ravaged infrastructure. Their first major project, the Kofi Annan Peace Bridge. Liberia's president is Ellen Sirleaf Johnson.
I stand here in testimony to the rebirth of my country. We have learned that no matter how protracted the conflict, the parties must sit around the table to iron out their differences and to make peace.
At the Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda in Arusha, 43 generals and politicians are on trial for genocide and crimes against humanity. But trying all 800,000 suspects in the murders would take a century. So Rwanda started the largest justice experiment in history, a village-based court system. The UN Development Program trained 250,000 village judges. Convicts pay for their crimes with community work, like building much-needed houses for war widows and orphans. Off the shore of Italy, another ship of migrants washed ashore. In a rapidly globalizing world, 200 million people are on the move looking for opportunity. Some risk their lives in unknown waters or struggle to cross borders illegally and fall prey to exploitation and abuse. A summit meeting in New York focused on the problems but also the benefits of migration, noting that the money migrants send home exceeds all international aid combined. 2006 marked a sad anniversary, 25 years of HIV/AIDS. The face of the epidemic is increasingly young, poor, and female. Twice as many young women are living with HIV than young men. Only 1 in 5 has access to antiretroviral medication. Khensani Mavasi, the first HIV-positive speaker to address the General Assembly.
Because of scientific advantages of the past 25 years, I have hope that when time comes for me to take treatment, it will be available. All the 14,000 more who will be infected by the end of today deserve this hope.
There is new hope for millions of people who cannot afford the drugs they need. 40 countries established an investment fund to purchase quality drugs and diagnostics to combat AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. Floods in Eastern Africa, droughts in many other parts of the globe, snow disappearing on Kilimanjaro, and Arctic icebergs melting faster than ever before reminded the world that climate change is real. A United Nations conference in Nairobi criticized a frightening lack of leadership in confronting the biggest global threat.
And I would want leaders around the world to really show courage and to know that if they do, their people and the population and the voters will be with them.
More than 1 billion people still have no access to clean drinking water. Nurio in Somalia is one of millions of women who struggle every day to find water. For a few in Mozambique, UNICEF has installed pumps driven entirely by children's playful energy. In 2006, the world's official development aid broke the $100 billion barrier. But global arms spending is still 10 times higher. Prospects are mixed to reach the Millennium Development Goals of eliminating extreme poverty and hunger by 2015. But around the world, citizens are urging their governments to keep on trying. More than 23 million people stood up against poverty in 80 countries. It was the largest coordinated movement in the Guinness Book of Records. And people also turned out in hundreds of thousands to march against hunger. With so much on its agenda, the United Nations is at the threshold of a new era. After 10 years at the organization's helm, Kofi Annan leaves office.
Yes, I shall miss what is, when all is said and done, the world's most exalting job. I yield my place to others with an obstinate feeling, a real obstinate feeling of hope for our common future. Thank you very much.
In October, the General Assembly elected Ban Ki-moon, Foreign Minister of South Korea, to be the next Secretary General.
The UN is needed now more than ever before. And the world's people will not be fully served unless peace, development, and human rights, the three pillars of the United Nations, are advanced together with equal vigor.